Hello and welcome back to the Guitar Craft and Other Stuff podcast. I am your host, Andre Flood. For those who are just listening to the audio version of the podcast, today's episode is also going to have a video component. Of course, as always, it is linked in the show notes below. However, again, as always, I'm going to be describing everything in full detail. So even if you don't want to watch, you probably won't need to anyway, because yeah, especially since it's today's topic of something that if you're a guitar player, you know, you've seen, you know a bit about, and that is the brand Gibson. Okay. Now, here's the thing. As a millennial, okay, as someone who was born in the 90s and who came up in an era where Gibson was the bad guy, it's easy for someone like me to sit here and bash Gibson, talk about the lawsuit issues, talk about the whole Play Authentic scandal, all of that stuff. But that's not what I'm here to do today because I feel like that's a bit played out. Everyone does it and it's not interesting. It's kind of boring. And who has time just to sit here and say negative things just to say negative things? Okay. That's not why we're here today. That being said, I did recently go through something, which I'll tell you about in a second, that reminded me why Gibson is frustrating as a company, incredibly frustrating. So, if you're listening to this podcast, you may have already saw or seen the guitar review I did of the Rick Beato signature Les Paul special guitar. Okay, that video is up on YouTube. And I had some negative things to say about that guitar. Yes, the craftsmanship wasn't entirely there for the price. Okay. But I also had some positive things to say, right? I talked about how it made me play differently. It made me play like I hadn't played before. And, you know, although that isn't my style per se, I did find it interesting. And as a musician, whenever you can find a tool that can make you a little bit more different, that can make you, I don't know, explore something new, that's always a tool that is potentially useful to, explore in the future. Okay. And as a result of that podcast, I started to think about Gibson, about the fact that I never owned Gibson guitars until now, that I never really gave them a fair chance. Now, the reason I haven't historically given Gibson a fair chance is because growing up, I couldn't afford a Gibson or even Epiphone guitar. So let me tell you a little bit about what that was like. So when I was, 12, 13, 14, Musicians Friends was a new company. This whole idea of buying gear online was still kind of a new-ish thing. And so every season, Musicians Friends would send out a catalog, a product catalog, and they might have had an article or two every now and then, but it was mostly just really nice high gloss images of all of their guitars they'll be coming out with in the season, all of their amps, all of their recording software, and all of that stuff. And as advertising that catalog that came every season worked, I bought a ton of stuff from there when I was in just high school. I had a little job working at Quiznos subs, and I didn't have any real bills or responsibilities, so I spent all my money at Musicians Friends on guitar gear, right? And in that catalog, Gibson always had a really big spread. I can close my eyes and remember a page where it would have Gibson guitars lined up almost like a pyramid, you know, and the images got smaller as they went to the top. I remember this image very vividly. And I remember how expensive those guitars were. I recall seeing one for $5,000 when I was, 13, 14 years old. The cheapest one might have been like 3,000. And then like, a Les Paul Junior, I forget which is which, but the one that has a simple body, like it's flat top, it's not arched like the traditional Les Paul, and it has one P90 pickup in the bridge, and that's it. Even that one was like over $1,000. And again, early 2000s, 12, 13 years old, $1,500 is, it might as well be $1,000,000, right? This is even before I had a job, of course. And so that was always off putting. But even when you would turn to the Epiphone line, you'd see the guitars, and Epiphone guitars were also, pretty expensive compared to Squier and Fender. So from an early age, even if I wanted to explore the idea of a Gibson guitar or an Epiphone guitar, I was just priced out of that experience. So I had a Squier. My dad bought me my first Squier guitar. It was like $100, $150 maybe. And a couple years later, or maybe even just 1 year later, I bought myself a Mexican Strat with like Christmas money, or maybe I was working already. I don't really remember, but I bought it off of eBay, a Mexican Strat. It was blue, with a red tortoise shell pickguard. It had a huge chip missing from the paint, which is why I got it for a great deal. I didn't care. Gold hardware. That guitar was amazing. I wish I still had it. I don't know what I did with it over the years. But point being, at the age of 14, 15, with Christmas money, I could save up and buy a used Fender guitar for very, very cheap. Not a Squier guitar, but a Fender guitar. And when you're thinking about a young person and they want to buy multiple things, they want to buy a guitar, they want to buy an amp, they want to buy pedals. If you can buy one used guitar that's of the real brand and not Squier but Fender, and then you can also still buy a real amp and a real Boss Blues Breaker pedal, all with like, Christmas money plus birthday money. Christmas is obviously in December. My birthday's in February, so I could save Christmas money and birthday money, and you know, I could get a little setup with a eBay Mexican Strat, small amp, Blues Breaker pedal. That's what I did, and so that was the first reason why early on I never tried a Gibson or a Epiphone. And when I finally did try one in like a guitar store or whatever, I was just never impressed by how the neck felt, by how the frets felt. And, maybe you can say it just wasn't my vibe, if you will. But, even the whole thing with a bridge, right? I always liked whammy bars. I always liked floating bridges. And on like a Les Paul or even, a 335 or whatever the case may be, you get a Bigsby, but that's pretty much it. Some have Floyd Roses, but at the time, those were incredibly expensive. You get the idea, right? The stars never lined up. I was never a type of guitarist who would play without a trem. And a Bigsby wasn't really the vibe, Can't do enough with it at the time. And, when I went to university, people had arch tops. And at that point, the idea of a Gibson arch top was cool for me because I do like Gibson's arch tops. I do like the 335 if you can find one that's of good quality, of course. And in college, I, of course, couldn't afford a Gibson arch top. Are you kidding me? Those are incredibly expensive. And the Epiphone arch tops weren't great. They're good, but they didn't have one with a floating pickup. And if they did, it was hard to find. And Ibanez had cheaper arch tops that were, really, really pretty, really high quality. The advertising for Ibanez is better. You get the idea. We'll just cut it there for now. I'm not going to go into the whole history of why I never tried Gibson. But point being, whenever I tried one, I wasn't impressed. I couldn't find one that had the style that I was looking for. And I couldn't afford one, okay? But now I can, so to speak, afford a Gibson, right? I can sell my Parkers, a couple of them, or even just one of them. I can save up my job money and I could buy a Gibson, but I still haven't yet up until now when I tried the Rick Beato signature Les Paul Special, which I'm going to be returning or selling, by the way, because it's not my vibe. But like I said in the beginning of the podcast, it gave me the idea to consider Gibson more seriously, which I'm going to tell you about right now. So I'm not going to reveal exactly what my plan is for 2023 in the YouTube videos, but let's just say I've been planning a video or a series of videos that may or may not include Gibson. Okay? That's all I'll say for now. And so I started doing research on Gibson guitars a bit more. This is this is now in the podcast where I'm going to explain to you what has annoyed me about Gibson, why I'm making this podcast even, okay? And we're going to get into the visual components now. So for those watching, here, if you're looking away, time to look at the screen. And for those listening only, I'll describe everything to the best of my ability. So I started to do a little bit of research because I'm looking into purchasing a Gibson guitar sometime in 2023 for the YouTube channel for an idea I have. Okay. Now, if you know anything about my YouTube channel and my guitar preferences, you'll know that I prefer stainless steel frets. One reason I even prefer stainless steel frets, even if I'm doing a test guitar, is because I don't like the idea of the quality of the guitar diminishing whatsoever after I've used it, you know? And if you play nickel frets even for a couple of days and you focus in carefully, at least me personally, right? I practice quite a bit, many hours a day. And if you look closely at the frets after a week of practicing for 4 hours a day, you'll find a couple dents here and there. And if you're going to be honest about reselling the guitar, you can't sell it for the full price because, I mean, there are a few fret imperfections. It's just, you know. So one reason I love stainless steel frets, even for a tester guitar, is because you know they're not going to diminish in a week or two or a month or year or whatever the case may be. You keep your full value of the instrument. Okay. And I also like the way they feel personally. I also require a floating bridge of some sort. Doesn't have to be a fancy floating bridge. It can be a simple, 2-point trim. Okay. And if it can stay in tune decently, I'm okay with it. I don't have to, I don't do a lot of crazy dive bombs. I'm not Steve Vai. I don't do anything like that. I just need to get some decent movement out of an arm, and I need it to stay in tune for, for a practice session, or at least half a practice session. And so in my mind, I thought to myself, okay, I need to find a Gibson guitar with a bridge that stays in tune and a floating bridge that stays in tune and preferably locking tuners and preferably stainless steel frets. That makes sense to me. That's something that I would be interested in, me personally. And keep in mind, I'm not some special guitarist, right? I'm not looking for a 7-string with slanted frets. What I'm asking for in 2022 is very, very simple. Floating bridge of some sort, locking tuners, maybe stainless steel frets. Maybe. If you can do it, great. Stainless steel frets. It would also be nice to have some contouring. Now we're going to go down the list even further. A little bit of contouring, some good high fret access would also be nice. Okay. So that was my initial thought. Let me walk you through the process of what happened to me when I started to explore Gibson and their website to find that type of guitar. I'm going to take a sip of coffee because it's the morning. I'll do it away from the mic so those listening to the podcast don't get a gross slurping sound, because I find that incredibly annoying and gross. Okay. So for those who are listening, I'm now on the Gibson website. And to simplify things, I said to myself, okay, I don't like crazy bodies like Explorers or even like the BC Rich guitars. Like, I just want a simple body. Okay. So in terms of solid body Gibson guitars, simple bodies, we have either the SG or excuse me, or a Les Paul variant, right? The Les Paul or the Les Paul Special. Just to make things quick, we're just going to look at Les Pauls, okay? So Les Pauls and SGs, those are the potential guitars that would make sense for me in terms of body shape. Now we need to start to look through what my options are for stainless steel frets. For those who know Gibson, you will already know, at least to my knowledge, there's not one guitar that they sell that has stainless steel frets. I could be wrong about that. But we're not going to dwell on it. We're not going to dwell on it anyway, because even if it didn't have stainless steel frets, I'd still give it a shot. In fact, as you know, I've been playing a D'Angelico lately. I absolutely love that instrument. Love it, love it, love it. It's one of my favorites now that I've ever played apart from my Parkers. It might even be tying my Parkers. It has nickel frets. I've never complained about it once. Okay. So no stainless steel frets, no big deal. So I'm on the SG page right now. We're going to start from the top. We're going to ignore the price until it matters. So I'm scrolling through the SG page, right? We have the SG Special stop tailpiece. We have the SG Standard 61 Maestro Vibrola Vintage Cherry. Okay. So this is a guitar with a bridge, a vibrato bridge, whammy bar. And I think to myself, okay, this can work. This SG could work. $2,400, not bad. SGs have great high fret access. Okay. There might be some neck dive, but probably not because it has a bridge on the back, extra hardware. Sounds good. So I click on this guitar and listen. A guitar with a floating bridge without locking tuners, okay? And without locking tuners, without a locking nut, you just know. You just know it's not going to stay in tune. I don't care what brand it is. You need at least locking tuners, okay? So I scroll down. We go to the specs. And, there's no locking tuners, okay? They're just regular tuners on this guitar, okay? And so I immediately know that although this red cherry guitar looks very beautiful, okay, and has a bridge that floats, I do know for a fact that it's not going to stay in tune just because it has these vintage tuners, okay? And so I'm thinking to myself, okay, if I want to test this guitar, I'm going to have to add locking tuners to it to make it stay in tune. Well, I'm going to have to add locking tuners just to attempt to make it stay in tune. It has a Graphtec nut, which I like, so I know the nut's going to be good. So I start to do a little bit of research on this bridge, the 61 Maestro Vibrola, and basically everyone online says, yeah, this doesn't stay in tune. There's no way it's going to stay in tune if you use the bridge. Like you use the bridge, one dip, and the guitar's out of tune. And so it's like, all right, so even if I had locking tuners, the bridge is not a bridge that returns to zero well. So that one's a no-go. And at first I was annoyed, but I said, you know what? This is an SG Standard 61. So this is a guitar. It's a vintage styled guitar. This guitar is made not to stay in tune, if you think about it, right? If you were to buy a vintage car and the handlings weren't as smooth as a modern day car, it's like, well, no, it's not. This is a guitar from 1950. It's supposed to feel like a guitar from 1950. If you want a modern guitar, a modern car, buy a modern car. If you want a vintage car that feels modern, find a brand that puts, modern stuff into a vintage shell, okay? But this guitar is not that. This guitar is not meant to be a guitar that functions like a 2022 guitar. Fine. I'm okay with that. In fact, I encourage it and people want to buy it. Fantastic. Let's go back to the other SGs and see what else we can get. The next one we find is a very similar guitar, Standard 61 with a sideways vibrola. It's basically the same bridge, but a different look to the bridge. I assume they made two in back in this time. I'll save you the time. It doesn't stay in tune. Okay, fine. It's also vintage. It doesn't matter. Scroll down, scroll down, scroll down. No other SGs with bridges in the, let's see, in the original category. Original, vintage, same thing. We go to the modern category. What does it mean for an SG to be modern? Well, there's two options. All of them have stop tail pieces. Okay, so what makes this modern? I'm not sure. I'm going to click on the most expensive of the modern ones, which is for $2,400. Not bad. It has a really, really ugly paint job that they're calling Blueberry Fade. But to each their own. I found the trans black paint job now. Clicked on that one. It's a little bit better looking, but I don't think it looks good. But who cares? This is a guitar. If it's good, it's good. Now I can't even get this guitar because again, it doesn't have a bridge, and so there's no point in me testing this guitar. Okay. But this is the modern series. It's the most expensive of the modern series. So let's see what makes it modern. The body shape is SG modern. So, maybe there's some tapering on the body or something along those lines. Fine. Graphtec nut. They all have Graphtec nuts. Medium jumbo frets. They all have medium jumbo frets. The neck profile is asymmetrical slim taper. Okay, so maybe it's a modern neck profile. Great. Grover mini tuners. Stop tailpiece. Clear top hats for the control knob. So electronics. Let's see what the electronics are. Okay, so we have push pulls. Right, we have coil taps on both, which is a modern feature, if you will. It's been around for a long time, but let's just call that a modern feature. We have a special neck shape. And we have Grover tuners. Why Grover tuners are modern, I'm not exactly sure. They're not even locking tuners. Okay. Grover non-locking tuners, a pickup split, a different neck shape. This is the most expensive SG modern for $2,400. Stainless nickel frets, of course. And so it's like, okay, well, I can't in the modern series, I can't get a bridge that floats, that stays in tune. I can't get locking tuners. Can't get stainless steel frets. I can't even get a modern heel joint. Standard Les Paul heel joint. Not sure why this guitar is special or what makes it important. So let's go to the artist series. The artist series is mostly focused on, traditional artists, classic artists. Brian Ray, 62 SG Jr. Similar old school bridge. It's not going to stay in tune. Promise you that. Did the research already. The Jimi Hendrix 1967 SG Custom won't stay in tune with the bridge. Kirk Douglas signature SG won't stay in tune with the bridge. You're getting the point. All of these artist models are of older artists, which is fine. That's totally fine. But they're essentially just the regular SGs with the regular SG specs with a special paint job. It's an SG that a specific artist played, but it's not special for the most part. And even if we go all the way down to the custom shop, right, and the Murphy lab, we're just getting the exact same guitars with the exact same features and the exact same bridges. Okay? So in this experience with the SG, I looked through, like I'm doing right now. I couldn't find a SG with locking tuners and a bridge that will stay in tune. Think about that. Think about that for a second. So they're not saying, oh, we don't make guitars with bridges that float. They're not saying that. We don't make bridges, we don't make guitars with bridges that are trems. We don't do that. They're not saying that. They're not saying we only make vintage trem bridge guitars. We only make vintage guitars. They're not saying that either. They're saying we only make mediocre bridges. Okay? They're not giving you the opportunity to buy something that is going to stay in tune. Think about that. They're not giving you the option. Even if you buy a guitar outside of the vintage line, you can only buy one with the vibrato that doesn't stay in tune. They're not giving you an option to buy a quality guitar that will stay in tune. How ridiculous is that? Now we're gonna get to the solution in a bit, but I want to look now at the Les Paul because I thought to myself, okay, well, Maybe they only do that with the SG because it's a less popular guitar compared to the Les Paul. Although I do believe the SG sells more than the Les Paul from what I remember. But, all right, let's look at the Les Pauls and see what they have there. Maybe there's something there for me. We go to the Les Pauls, and they have a lot of different models. I'm in the modern section, okay? The first thing I'll tell you is that in the modern section, there's not one Les Paul without a stop tailpiece, okay? Now, I'm going to go back one step before, and we're going to come back to the modern section, but I want to go look at the other types of Les Pauls because I do know they offer some interesting, unique, special versions of the Les Paul. The thing is that with their website, they have almost too many, but okay, let's start. So we're in the Les Paul original section. I'm going around looking. We have nothing with, and we don't have anything that's not just a plain stop tailpiece in the original section, but that's fine. Why? Because the original really means vintage, and if they never sold one back in the day with trem arm, that's totally cool. That's the original series or the vintage series. Cool. We go to the modern series, which I already told you. We'll come back to it, but only stop tailpieces. Fine. We go to the artist series. All right. Scrolling through. Only stop. Oh, okay. So we have everything as a stop tailpiece. And then we have two that are not stop tailpieces. Well, I'm not sure if we have one or two. Let's check them both out. Okay. The first one is the Dave Amato. I think that Amato, I can't really read from here at this distance, but Amato, I'm not sure who he is. I'm sure he's a fantastic guitarist, but it's a Les Paul standard with a Floyd Rose. Beautiful. We have a guitar that has a floating bridge that stays in tune. I know it stays in tune because it's a Les Paul. The issue is that there's two small issues, and we'll start with the smallest issue first. The Les Paul, the Floyd Rose is a pretty old technology at this point. From the 80s, maybe even from the 70s, but definitely from the 80s. We're talking 40 years old. Since then, just about every company has figured out that you don't need a locking nut. All you need is a nice 2-point trim, locking tuners. We can get a guitar that stays in tune. So it would be nice if we didn't have to have the whole Floyd Rose thing just to do a little bit of work with the arm that stays in tune, but fine. Fine. At least we have something. But this is a $5,100 guitar. $5,100 to get a Les Paul that has a Floyd Rose. That's insane. That's insane. Who could realistically justify that price, right? You could buy a different brand that makes similar guitars like Les Pauls and put your own Floyd Rose on it for probably $2,000, probably even way less than that, right? But fine. It's the Gibson name. It's an artist. It's a signature model. Let's look at it. And so we see the Floyd Rose. We see it's, oh, by the way, it's Dave Amato. Not a font is bigger and I can read it. So let's look through this. It's a weight relieved body, which is nice, which means it'll be a little bit more lightweight than a standard Les Paul. Great. He has his own fancy profile on it. Fine. Of course, we have nickel frets, which is not great, but okay. And it's like, it's a Floyd Rose. It's just a Les Paul with a Floyd Rose. Let's look at the heel joint. Trying to find the heel joint with the magnifying glass. Okay. So you know what? I'm going to give Gibson credit here. We do finally have a really nice heel joint. The heel joint on this Dave Amato Les Paul Access standard, that is a respectable heel joint that could hang with with most modern guitar brands. Okay. For those who can't see, it looks similar to the Nuno Betancourt heel joint. Of course, this is the neck through, but what I'm saying is it's the same shape. It's very, very cut. I could promise you'd have no problem with high fret access on this guitar. Fantastic. $5,100 nickel frets. And it's like, at this point, I told you a little bit earlier how Gibson priced me out of being able to buy something that would be useful for me personally. And as a 30-year-old person with a job and fairly expensive guitars, I have guitars that I've bought for over $3,000, $3,100, $3,500. But $5,100, that's too much for me. I had a really fancy guitar built. I've never showed it before. I'll show it at some point. A guitar made for Indian classical music. Something else that I also study. I designed this on Photoshop. I thought about it, mixed different Indian instruments with electric guitar. Worked with a luthier for a year and a half, maybe 2 years. I forget how long it was. Back and forth through email and conversations, designing it like that. And that guitar was less than this guitar. Okay. That's a one-off, everything hand-built, hand-selected woods, not even a standard type of guitar. That was less than this Dave Amato Les Paul. Okay. And for $5,100, you can get just about any guitar built by a decent luthier. You can go to the Kiesel Custom Shop and get any guitar built, any spec for $5,000 just about. And a lot of other companies like Kiesel have doing a similar thing. You get the point. They've priced me out of a good guitar. Okay, let's just go back one step. This guitar won't be a guitar that I could purchase for my planned video. Okay. I'm going to look at the Joe Perry Les Paul. And I'm looking at it because it looks like it has a bridge as well, floating bridge. Okay, here we go. Beautiful. We have a 2-point floating bridge on a Les Paul. So I don't know exactly what type of 2-point trem this is. Let me just quickly check. I'm literally doing this all on the fly for the first time because when I did this by myself, I realized that I was getting frustrated and I didn't want to not record it. So we have a Godo. Look at that. A Godo VS100 trem. There we go. That's exactly what I was asking for. We have a 2-point trem that's probably going to stay in tune decently well. I don't believe we have locking tuners on this one, which would be insane, but let's just double check. No, non-locking tuners. I can't tell. If they are locking, it's not specifying locking. It just says Grover kidney tuning machines. So I'm assuming they're not locking, but fine. Maybe they are. And we have, again, the really nice heel joint. Really nice heel joint. 2-point trim that won't stay in tune. That will stay in tune. Non-locking tuner, so who knows? So for $5,500, if $5,100 was too expensive, now we have $5,500. Can't afford it. Let's just keep going. Custom shop. We have a 1955 Les Paul, I guess probably a replica. $8,000 Bigsby vibrato. Obviously can't afford it. Scrolling down. Nothing else. Nothing else with a bridge that will stay in tune. We have another Les Paul with a Floyd Rose. This one is $5,000. $5,100 for a black version of the same guitar. We keep looking through the Les Paul section. Les Paul section is quite large, which is going to ultimately bring me to a point after we make sure we go through all of it. Another Les Paul with a Bigsby. This one is $9,000. $9,000. Okay. And that's all. So going through Gibson's, two most famous solid body options, the SG and the Les Paul, there's exactly two options that are under $6,000 that work for me. One is $5,100, the other one is $5,500. And so we're going to continue with my thought process here, but I want to pause for a second to talk about the fact that, well, you could say to yourself, Andre, just get an Epiphone. Maybe you can find an Epiphone that has what you're looking for. But it's like, the whole thing is that I want to give Gibson a try, because if I try an Epiphone guitar, it's going to be like, well, you didn't like it because it's not a Gibson. You got to go with the real brand because Epiphone. And it's like, and the whole allure is that it's Gibson. Even if I wasn't doing a YouTube video on it, the idea is that it's a Gibson guitar. It's the company. It's Gibson. It's Fender. These are the companies. And they've priced me out of getting anything that is even remotely doable for myself. So I said, okay, you know what? I have another option here. I can buy a plain Les Paul or SG, and then I can add my own bridge to it. Okay. And so when I was thinking about this option, I thought about the fact that I would probably just do a Les Paul. The SG has higher fret access, but I've also read that SGs can feel a bit weird in the hand because of how the tailpiece sits much more forward than other guitars. Whether or not that's true, I'm not sure, but just for argument's sake, the same bridges that fit on the Les Paul fit on the SG anyway, for the most part. At least the aftermarket bridges, so it doesn't really matter. Fine. So I go, okay, I'm going to find a reasonably priced Les Paul. I'll buy it. I'll add my own bridge. Perfect. So let's go back through Les Paul and just find, a somewhat affordable, simple Les Paul guitar. Found it. Les Paul Special Tribute Humbucker Worn White Satin. Right? Let's just look at this guitar real quick. They have other colors as well, but let's just keep things simple. Get the white satin because it looks quite nice. White guitar, cedar wood grain, pick guard, humbuckers. Let's quickly look at the specs. It's not an arch top, which is fine. I don't mind a flat top guitar. Graph Tech nut, great. Okay. And in terms of the hardware, let's just check the tuners. Let's see. Vintage Deluxe tuners. Okay, so it has vintage tuners, which is not going to work, but it might not work. We'll see. But point being, we found our $1,000 Les Paul to start with. It's a Gibson. This is a real Gibson. This is a great start for us. Let's just quickly look at the heel joint. Old school Gibson heel joint, fine, no problem on a Les Paul. Okay. So then we have to think about the different options when we have a trem arm. Now, in terms of retrofitting onto Gibson, there's two bridges that kind of risen to the top over the last few years for their claims of great tuning stability. Okay. So the first one that we're going to look at is the Duesenberg Les Trem 2. Okay. This is essentially a trem arm. It looks similar to a Bigsby, but it's a bit simpler. Like the strings go right through all the way to the bridge. It doesn't require weird wrapping. It's just like a top-mounted bridge with the strings going through it, and it works like a Bigsby, but a lot of people say online that these stay in tune well. Okay? Great. $130 or so, no problem. So now our total price is $130, $140. And these retrofit fine, no special holes, no nothing, no messing up the guitar. Perfect. But I do know, after doing research, that in order for this bridge to stay in tune, we're going to need locking tuners. Now we got to buy a pair of locking tuners that are going to add on to the Les Paul. That's going to be another $70. Locking tuners and bridge, $200. Sounds good. And I was thinking about that configuration. I did some more research, one on the forums, one on the YouTube comments, and I kept seeing people say that it's not staying in too well, and that you also need something called a string butler. So string butler, I have one on screen right now, $50 Amazon Prime. It's this triangle device that you have to affix to your headstock, drill holes in your headstock to secure it according to how it's supposed to be secured. And what it basically does is it turns your string pull from the strange diagonal for the G and D strings to straight through and then a diagonal closer to the tuning pegs. Do you see my frustration yet? Do you see my frustration? It's like, okay, I can't even get the bridge that I want for under $5,000. Fine, I'll buy my own bridge. Buy the bridge, fine. The guitar doesn't come with locking tuners. I have to buy that too, fine. But now I also have to potentially buy a string butler device. And so if you know anything about moving parts, right? You know, the more things you introduce to the system, the more opportunity there is for error. As we start to add a new bridge and new tuners and now a string butler plus the nut's still there, the nut's grafting, it'll be fine, but you get the point where I have too many things now. There's too many things. The string butler itself has a point of contact with the strings that twists the strings and then goes into breaks it to the tuners. So we have the tuning peg as a point of contact, the string butler as a point of contact, the nut, the bridge, and then the trem itself. 5 points of contact. And will that setup stay in tune? It might. I think it will, but I have to go through and you have to drill holes in the headstock for this. So now I can't ever sell the guitar as once you drill holes into the headstock, you're losing $300-$400 of value instantly, almost cutting the price of the guitar in half for the hole drills, the little tiny holes. So I'm going to add a $50 string butler, $70 locking tuners, $130 bridge, $250 of additional parts. I'm going to cut the value of the guitar in half because I had to drill holes in it. And I'm not going to recoup any money for these parts, So it's a $1,300 project. It might or might not work. And the best I'll be able to sell it for is $500 if need be. And this is just to get an experience of a guitar company that I'm trying to be honest with, all of that work. And so there's one other option, and that is the Floyd Rose FRX bridge. Essentially, it is a very complicated Floyd Rose that mounts on top of the guitar. So it doesn't require any drilling, any holes, nothing like that. Fantastic. The spring is connected to the bridge, so it's self-contained. Fantastic. And it comes with a locking nut that attaches to the truss rod cover. Okay. The bridge is $285 to $320, depending on the color. Let's just say $300. Now, they describe it as a simple surface mounting bridge that is easy to install. But if you do any research online, you find very quickly that it's not simple to install, and that people who often install bridges as a hobby and mess with guitar stuff, they have found it very difficult to install this bridge. So now I know I'm going to have to take this to a tech, because if it doesn't work perfectly, I'm going to assume that it's because I made a mistake. And if that is in the equation when I'm doing my guitar review and my testing, to me, that's not fair to the instrument and the setup that I'm using. So it's a $300 bridge. I'm going to have to bring it to a tech to get it installed. It's going to be another $100, $150. So now we're talking $450. When I sell it, I'm going to have to remove it, take it back to the tech, get it set back up to normal, another $100 or so. You see what I'm saying here? This is what we have to go to. This is what we have to go through just to get a somewhat simple thing that literally every other guitar company is doing. Every other guitar company, you can buy a guitar that will stay in tune with a floating bridge, locking tuners. We're ignoring my stainless steel fret obsession. We're ignoring that completely. Ignoring it completely. In order to get a guitar with a floating bridge that will stay in tune from Gibson, you need to pay at least $5,100. That is insane in 2022, especially when that guitar doesn't even come with stainless steel frets. It's absolutely ridiculous. Ridiculous. Now, I want to show you one more thing. And if you've been following me, you're probably getting sick of me talking about this, but I'm going to show you one final time. That beautiful heel joint that I saw in the Les Paul, okay? We'll even bring it back up. The fancy heel joint, which I gave Gibson credit for actually having a heel joint that's that sculpted. It looks modern. It looks like it will work. By the way, that heel joint's not on any of the modern Les Paul line. That's just on this Artist series, which is $5,100. I believe a significant portion of the cost of this guitar is this heel joint. Why? Because, okay, this guitar is $5,100, and it has the Floyd Rose and this heel joint. Let's quickly go back to the Les Paul Modern series, and we'll look at that heel joint. And you'll notice that the heel joint on the Les Paul Modern is not nearly as good. Not nearly as good. It is cutaway to some degree, but there's a huge gap in the cutaway between the neck pocket and the neck itself, a huge ledge. Whereas the $5,100 guitar doesn't have that ledge. It's much, much nicer and much more sculpted. And the Les Paul Modern is $3,000. $3,000, no stainless steel frets. The thing that makes this special, one of the things that makes it special is this heel joint, which isn't even as good as what we know Gibson can do because they have the even nicer heel joint on the $5,100 guitar. So how much does it cost to make a beautiful heel joint? I'm not sure, but I do have, I'm going to show you it right now on screen, a picture of the D'Angelico Bob Ware guitar. And by the way, D'Angelico does this on guitars that are even cheaper than this, but I'm going to use the more expensive one. This is a D'Angelico Bob Ware guitar. And look at this heel sculpting. This is the most, again, if you're not watching the podcast, you've seen me show it anyway, I'm sure. But this is as good as a heel joint can be, period. Now, we can debate about what heel joint you prefer. We can debate about how you want the transition to look. We can debate about how much, I don't know, what the angles should be. Kiesel does it slightly different. Parker Fly does it slightly different. They're all great. You can't make a heel joint better than this one. You can make one that's equally as good. You can't make one that's simply objectively better. You can't, because this is perfect. You can reach every single fret. You never feel the body of the guitar. You never feel the heel joint. They sell this on guitars that are less than $1,000 and that are not made in the US. To get this level of heel joint on a Gibson, it's $5,100. D'Angelico makes this for less than $1,000. This is my frustration with Gibson. That's my frustration. It's really that simple. I'm not asking for a lot. I don't even want the heel joint. I want a guitar that stays in tune with a floating bridge of some sort that stays in tune. That's less than That's $3,000. Charge me $3,000. I'll take the nickel frets still. Give me locking tuners, a 2-point trim. That's all. So anyway, I hope I don't seem crazy. I hope you understand my point here in this podcast today. I do think that Gibson has the potential to be a great company. I do think it's within their realm of technical ability to do this. But just as a quick summary, this is what I want. You know what? I'll start with what I want the most as a summary, and then I'll give you what I'll accept. I want stainless steel jumbo frets. Stainless steel jumbo frets, locking tuners, 2-point trim that stays in tune, and I want a very, very nice sculpted heel joint like that D'Angelico has on their less than $1,000 guitars, and that Gibson has on their $5,000+ guitars. That's what I want. I want all of those things for under $3,000 or at $3,000. Okay, you won't do it for $3,000? Forget about the stainless steel frets. I'll take whatever plain nickel frets you usually use. Don't even care. I'll take the traditional old school Les Paul heel joint. Don't even care. Put it on the SG body. Doesn't matter. Give me locking tuners, 2-point trim on any Les Paul or SG guitar for $3,000 or less, and I'll be happy. Not only will I be happy, but you'll have a lot more customers like me. And if you can give them the locking tuners, the 2-point trim, the nickel frets, and the sculpted heel joint for $3,000, I promise you, Gibson will sell that guitar. That guitar will sell out instantly. I can promise it. I can promise if Gibson makes locking tuners, stainless steel frets, sculpted heel joint, 2-point trim that stays in tune and floats. If Gibson makes that for $3,000 tomorrow, it will sell out instantly. I will be one of the customers. That's all for today. I'll talk to you soon.